Hey guys, so I got a little bit annoyed on Twitter, which is, well, that's pretty common. You also gotta remember, not to take things all that serious, but at the same time, you do have to give a little bit of pushback, whether it's someone from your side or from not your side, from the opposite side. But seeing the world in black and white like that, it's not really accurate. The world is a world full of alliances, where people's interests align, even if their personal opinions are not the same. So you'll have people with completely backgrounds, dispositions, like religious beliefs, ethnicities, excuse me, my frickin' inability to speak English is coming through right now, all come together for one common cause. So for example, if you go through the exit polls from the 2024 election, right? And you can find it on Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia has a leftist slant to it, and you don't know if the exit polls are 100% accurate. But those are just hard numbers, and should just be a random sampling of the US population. So the exit polls shouldn't be biased. Now, if you look on those, you'll see all the breakdowns of what religion people follow, what their race is, whether they consider themselves conservative, moderate, or liberal, or if they consider themselves like Republican, Democrat, or Independent. And a whole host of other categories like race and age, or race and age, or other stuff like that, right? Now, if you look at race, you'll find that white people overall voted for Trump. And it's not like a huge difference. I think it's 54 to 46, which is an 8% difference. Something like that. And then you'll find that black people voted 13% for Trump, which is a 74% difference. And then you'll find Native Americans. 64% of Native Americans voted for Trump, which that means 36% voted for Kamala. Now, these are just the people who voted. These aren't the people who sat the election out or were ineligible to vote for one reason or another. But you'll find there's a lot of differences between men, women, different races, different ages. For example, people over 50 tended to vote for Trump. People from 40 to 49 voted evenly between the two. So everyone from 18 to 39 tended to vote for Kamala. With the older you got, the more likely you're to vote for Trump. Because those people usually are more financially secure. They're not as drawn in by the promises of government benefits. They have had more experience with the political landscape, therefore that they are more likely to make an informed decision. In theory. Always in theory. Then you'll find that 21% of black men who voted for Trump. Whereas 7% of black women who voted for Kamala. Now, why I mentioned Twitter earlier is that there are generalizations you can make about each category. Stereotypes speak to a reality, a general reality. So, the average person, you can kind of guess on where they fall. Okay? If you're a white dude, you're more likely to be conservative. Right? If you're a Jewish dude, you might be like half and half. If you're a Jewish female, you might be more likely to be liberal. That tends to be how it works out, at least for the last election. Okay? If you tend to be Christian, you tend to be conservative. Islam is kind of interesting on how it falls, because there's certain ideologies within Islam that kind of like determines whether or not they'll vote for a conservative or a liberal. And it really just depends. But like, there are generalizations in the world, stereotypes. Okay? Currently, in this day and age, Muslims are more likely to have religious extremism, prevalent in their society. Now, part of that is social pressure. Part of that is anger. When you're an angry individual, you tend to gravitate towards an ideology that you believe that will fix the world. And if the main ideology in your region is a religious one, that will be what a lot of people fall into. And if someone's angry, they're looking for somebody to blame. And they'll often blame the people that they see as being on top of the world. So if you're from a poor Muslim country, you're likely to be angry at somebody who's from a rich and wealthy country. Say like America, which is predominantly white. Okay? Now, why are they angry? Now, there's a lot of reasons somebody can be angry. Like, I can be angry. I've been angry a lot. Specifically over politics. Because there's certain things that, like, you see the world in a certain way, somebody else doesn't see it that way, and you think that they're doing something cruel, stupid, or just otherwise they judge you, they try to oppress you, they do something to hurt you or your family in some way. So a lot of conservatives will be angry if they get like taxed too much, for example, because you're hurting my ability to pay for my expenses because I have to pay you more, and therefore I can't spend as much on luxuries, entertainment, that kind of thing. Or trying to get like a bigger house or a nicer car or something. A bigger TV, again, luxuries. Or maybe I can't buy the food that I want to eat today. Maybe I want to buy a steak instead of a piece of chicken or something like that. You know, stuff like that. But there's another reason people can be angry. And it could be genetics. Now, this is where people go off the rails. A lot. In certain cultures, it is acceptable for you to marry your first cousin. Now, scientifically, we discovered a long time ago that inbreeding with a first cousin, basically anything more closely related to you than a third cousin, is detrimental to your mental and physical health. It causes some genetic defects, and it can cause behavioral issues. This is often why people don't like pit bulls, because pit bulls have been inbred for so long that a lot of them have a lot of issues with dealing with their emotions. They get very angry very quickly, and they're very powerful animals. Now, there are pit bulls who are not as inbred, either that they spread their genes wide enough, far enough, or they were mixed with something else, and none of their descendants for the last few generations were inbred. Therefore, you have a lot of pit bulls that can be perfectly well trained and behaved and are not given to anger whatsoever. It's the inbreeding that more causes the issue. Now, pit bulls are bred to be a protective breed, so that is also in their genetic code. So if you don't train them to recognize a threat versus somebody that's, just walking by, that could also cause a problem. Now, in the Middle East and say Somalia, they have allowed the marriage of first cousins for seemingly thousands of years. So you get a lot of angry, low intelligent people in the country. Now, you can argue about the effluency of IQ tests, because you can't give an IQ test to somebody who hasn't been taught how to read and write, okay? Or somebody who hasn't had the focus on reading and writing, because that is part of the test, reading comprehension. Now, somebody who can't read or write may not technically be stupider than somebody who can read and write, but it does stimulate a part of your brain and cause more gray matter inside your brain, which does affect other parts of your ability to analyze and comprehend the world. So if you can't read and write, there's a good chance that your IQ is not going to be as high. And you often have to get taught how to read and write at a young age, because the older you get, the harder it is to learn it and to become a master at it. Now, there are people out there who believe that all Muslims are violent, or all Muslims are given to become a religious extremist, or any kind of extremist. And again, stereotypes. They can be important, but they are not always true for specific individuals. Okay? Not every Somali, not every Iraqi, not every Pakistani. My cousin is a liberal, because his mom's a liberal, and his dad more conservative, but didn't really fight that much, didn't really want to argue that much, and as he gets older he becomes more conservative, whereas the mom, my aunt, is more liberal, and she passed that on to the kids because she's a little bit more outspoken, and they both married liberal husband. One married a liberal husband, one married a liberal wife. Now, the male cousin married a Pakistani girl. Now, you would believe that a lot of Muslims would be conservative because they believe in the nuclear family, being religious, wanting to be able to support low taxes. They want low taxes so they have more money to bring home, so they can take better care of their kids. They care more because they have more mouths to feed. But she is kind of liberal. And I kind of figured this out when I brought up to her that Texas cares more about the forest than California does. And she's like, what do you mean? And she was almost offended by it. And I was like, Texas has 5 times the amount of forest. It doesn't have nearly as many wildfires. Now, once you get past the Rocky Mountains, it does become drier. But halfway through the country is where the dry part starts. And Texas is definitely within the dry part of the country. because of the rain shadow that the Rocky Mountains causes. But they don't have as many wildfires. Why is this? It's because California does not do controlled burns. California tries to prevent fire at all costs and does not allow for firemen to light small isolated pockets of forest alight, burning out the dry brush and having a more controlled, smaller fire that will not burn as readily if a fire starts in a nearby sector of the forest. Whereas Texas does clear out the dry brush every once in a while. Now, starting a small isolated fire may kill a lot of animals in the area, but if it's a small isolated fire, the smaller animals can either dig down because the fire won't be as hot because it's not as big, or they can simply just leave the area and escape. Only the weak, injured, or slow wouldn't be able to escape. But if you have 100 square kilometers of forest on fire, a small bird might not be able to fly from one end of that fire to the other end without succumbing to either the flames or especially the smoke. So again, a Muslim person may often be more conservative, but my cousin's wife is a liberal. And you can say that on average, the Muslim community is more prone to extremism, perhaps due to inbreeding, perhaps due to culture. But that doesn't mean that all of them are going to lean in that direction. Now, what set this video off is that I follow this person on Twitter called Kaguya. And usually their points, they usually have good points. And unlike a lot of leftists, I will not completely cut somebody out because I disagree with one part of their belief system. But what Kaguya said is that Epstein proves basically that Jewish people, specifically the Jewish race, are more prone to wanting to control the world. Basically. It's probably slightly of an uncharitable take on what Kaguya said. But I was like, no. That is not true. Because now you're saying genetically they're prone to that. Whereas a Jewish person could be of a lot of different races. Now they tend to try to stay within their own religion, to marry within their own religion. But a lot of people nowadays are not as religious as they used to be, and that includes a lot of Jews as well. For example, George Soros is an atheist. And a lot of people who say that calling out George Soros makes you anti-Semitic, you already know they're arguing in bad faith, because George Soros doesn't even believe in his own supposed religion. And anti-Semitism is a distaste for people practicing Jews. At least that's what it should be. To be fair, George Soros' son is a complete moron, but I think that's just because he fell too far away from the tree than because of any inbreeding or anything. I have no idea who George Soros' wife or who his kid's mother is, if he was ever married in the first place, honestly. I just know he has a kid, and his kid is dumb. Very dumb. You should have seen him at Davos. The man cannot speak for the life of him. Nah, to be fair, being able to publicly speak does not necessarily also equate to intelligence. But seeing what George Soros' son has said throughout the years, it is very clear that the guy has no idea how the world works. Anyways, I refuse to believe that all Jewish people have a tendency to want to control the rest of the world. Okay? It's just a bad faith argument. Because I know obvious exceptions. Master of the TDS and his wife, for example, are two people that don't fit that mold. And then Nuxanar also does not fit that mold. And then even saying like the Israeli government controls the entire world is giving way too much credit to Israel. Because if they controlled everything, then no one would ever attack them. No one would ever, like, speak out against them. No one would ever think to even question them. If someone had complete control over society, they would be completely untouchable by everyone. Now, granted, by that metric, you could say, like, the Amish rule the world. Because no one ever suspects the Amish. But at the same time, power also comes from wealth, political power, the ability to enforce your will onto other people, like your ability to use technology to, again, force your will onto other people. So no, the Amish also wouldn't fit. Also, they're very easy to make fun of online. You can say the most wild things about the Amish online, and you're unlikely to get an Amish person coming on to defend themselves. Because they're just completely out of the political zeitgeist. That's also another reason that, like, they just don't have any power, because they're not in the political discussion. No one ever gets mad at them, therefore nobody ever has a fight with them. Therefore, they never get into arguments about it. Therefore, they have no influence besides their ability to vote. And they'll vote for the person that they believe will leave them the hell alone, which tends to be conservatives, mind you. So, again, completely different ideology than most conservatives, but they will lean towards the conservative direction because they just want to be left alone. And people who don't want to leave them alone are liberals that want to tax them more, or introduced more standards on them, like ban their ability to drink raw milk, for example. Which, if they're, like, causing health issues, I can kind of understand it. Like, if they're selling it to rubes that don't know any better, and that milk happened to be tainted, and now they're spraying disease everywhere, okay, that kind of makes sense. But if it's just keeping it within their own community, and they're not getting sick from it, then there's no reason to, like, ban them from selling raw milk. Now, even if they were getting sick within the community from raw milk, and they're not policing themselves, there are libertarians out there that would say, well, just let the problem deal with itself. If they won't, like, standardize the quality of their milk, then that's on them, and they should just be left alone and deal with the consequences of their actions. Whereas somebody who has empathy will say, no, I have to make sure that I control, like, their decisions in life and make sure that they can't drink raw milk. I'll make sure to break into their house and steal all of their raw milk so they can't get sick from it. Or I'll ban them, and if I find them, like, producing raw milk and not, like, treating it properly, I'll give them a fine, or I'll arrest them for it. Two different, completely different ideologies that happen to work together. For example, communists and Muslims often work together. Now, why would that be? Muslims tend to be conservative, right? And communists tend to be liberal, right? Well, the thing is there's this philosopher named Gramsci, and he was like a communist. And basically his idea was, if people are comfortable, they won't get angry. And if they won't get angry, they won't overthrow the government. And if they won't overthrow the government, they won't install a communist one. Because the communist government was in the minority. There weren't very many communist governments. So, therefore, you have to make people uncomfortable. And that will make people angry. And then that anger can be used to start protest, which can be used to eventually change the government, which will then be used. In that point, the communists will come in and they will convince people that the best government that they should change to will be communism. That's Gramsci's ideology in the nutshell. Make people uncomfortable. Now, if somebody has, like, say, a monarchy, which tends to be a conservative government, and you have a bunch of religious extremists who also tend to be conservative, but then you have a bunch of communists fighting against the government, and the communists want to overthrow that government, obviously, and the religious extremists want to get rid of their monarchy and become a religious society ruled by religious leaders instead of a king, which in the West, the king was a religious leader. But in the East, specifically the Middle East, the king is not always a religious leader. Usually they are just rich and powerful people who may happen to be religious. So the communists want to overthrow the government. The religious extremists, the Islamists, will join the communists in helping to overthrow that government. And then when the communists and the Islamists overthrow that government, the communists will then try to install a communist country, a communist government. So what will the Islamists do? They will stab the communists in the back, kill them all, and then install their conservative religious society. So you'll have Muslims in America who will support the communists, but that's only because they don't like the current government and they want to eventually first ally themselves with the communists, and then when the communists are no longer useful, then to eliminate the communists. Now, this is also a big part of why communism and fascism are both socialist ideologies, because it's the same premise. The communists always opposed the government, always opposed the British government, the French government, the Turkish government, the German government, the Italian government, what have you. Well, according to Mussolini, that he tried the communist way for a very long time, and he found that the communists were not willing to take things far enough. They weren't willing to get violent. All they ever did was speak about what kind of government they wanted. They didn't try to overthrow the government. They tried to just slowly convince people to their side, and most people realized that they were full of shit and wouldn't switch to communism, or they didn't think that they needed to because they were all comfortable. So what did Mussolini did? He took socialism, added a component of extreme violence to it, and intimidated everybody to either become a fascist or to at least not oppose the fascists. And since the communists wanted to take over the government, but they were too weak, and they were also opposing Mussolini's own rise to power, they eventually became victims of the fascists as well. Or they just switched from communism to fascism because it wasn't that hard of a change. That's why a lot of people who were fascists in Germany, if they were not hanged after the war, they very easily switched over to communism. And there are a lot of people out there that will say that fascism is a right-wing ideology. And those people are full of shit. And you may not understand why that is, but I can provide you sources on why that is. Specifically, a good one, it's Arch Warhammer's, I think it's on his Archcast channel, his video on why the Imperium of Man in the Warhammer 40k universe is not fascist. And he explains where Mussolini's ideology came from, what he based it on, and actually goes through his teaching. Now, if you look on Wikipedia, again, full of lies and propaganda and left-wing ideology, the first sentence, I think, says that fascism is a far-right ideology. But then if you go down and you read the definition of fascism on Wikipedia, you will find that there are like a dozen different definitions for fascism on Wikipedia. And Wikipedia, the editors on that site, couldn't decide which definition actually fits fascism. Now, socialism believes that the government, run by the people, need to gather up all the resources and spread it evenly out through the population based on their ability to work. So if you are not able to work, well, you had to put in the time. If you did not put in the time, you are basically a parasite, basically. You have to be able to put in some kind of effort, and then when you retire, you will still live just as comfortably as you did before you retired. That is the idea. But communists always tend to have a group of oligarchs rise to the top and take the majority of the power for themselves while the workers get nothing. Fascism is ironically a little bit more honest about where the power actually goes. Fascism takes all the power, all the resources, and then says, we will provide these resources to the people we think that need it. So it's redistributing the resources, which is a socialist ideology, but it's based on where the fascist believes the resources are needed most. So if the fascists are at war, they'll put more resources towards building weapons. All within the state, all for the state, nothing against the state. That is fascism. Which is not that different from, each according to their means, the socialist version of it. If you actually analyze it, it's the same basic premise, but taken in a slightly different direction. Which is also kind of funny why, saying, oh God, who was the fascist leader of Spain? Oh, I can't remember. Oh, dear Lord. Christ. That's not important. Anyways, the fascist leader of Spain had a completely different version of fascism, which he eventually decided that, well, he's not going to have a successor, so he was going to put a monarchy in charge instead, and the monarchy decided on having a republic instead, a democracy. I think it's, yeah, they have an actual republic, not a democracy, because they actually have a parliament still. Franco, that's his name, Franco. And if you're like, but the fascists and the communists fought each other, they weren't allies, completely ignoring the fact that the Austrian fascist got killed by the German fascists. And guess what, guys? Leftists turn on each other a lot. Because when a fascist of one specific type of fascism doesn't agree with another type of fascism, one tends to rule over the other, which is why Mussolini became subservient to a certain Austrian painter. Or how the Stalinists got purged after Stalin died, and they got replaced by people who didn't want Stalinists to rule the government. Because as soon as one ideology falls slightly out of favor, as soon as one person's belief system, de-Stalification, they de-Stalinized the Soviet Union. That didn't mean they stopped being socialist. That didn't mean they stopped being communists. They were just a slightly different version of communists. Just like how fascism and communism, Leninism, Trotskyism, Stalinism, Marxism, they're all different types of socialism. Now, some may be more closely related to others. Leninism and Marxism, very closely related to the point where they're almost considered synonymous. But Trotskyism is completely different from Stalinism, because Trotskyism believes in the global, continuous revolution. A very non-isolationist ideology, where Stalinism is, we're going to centralize our power in these countries, and no one and no ideology is going to get in, and no one is going to be allowed to leave, which is a very isolationist policy. By the way, the majority of communists within the United States are Trotskyists, if they actually admit to following any certain variety of communism. If someone is just a generic communist, they tend to be superseded by somebody who has a more strongly held belief system. And the people who have very strong beliefs and have a lot of people who swear up and down by the ideology inside the United States are the Trotskyists. Just so you know. Anyways, I went through and I found like all of the communist minor parties within the United States, and you can look at like how they interact with each other, and you'll find that they fight all the time. They fight a lot. And of course there will be people out there who fundamentally don't understand the ideology that they're supposed to be following. So you might have somebody who is otherwise conservative who might call himself a fascist and not even realize that, you know, if he actually had the government formed, he would be one of the first people to be executed. That's why frickin' Yuri Bezmenov called like a lot of like communists, Western communists, the what did he refer to them as? Oh, God, I keep forgetting a lot of things today. A lot of things. I just had 2 exams in college, so my brain is a little bit fried right now. The useful idiots. He called them the useful idiots because they believe themselves to be communists. They believe that once the communist revolution comes about, that they will be an artist. But as soon as the communist revolution takes hold and forms the government, they will be assigned to where the communist government believes them to be most useful, which means they'll be sent to the mines. And when they refuse to be sent to the mines, they'll just be put up against a wall and executed. Or if they have a belief system that the communists believe to be subversive, say something that they held, some belief system that they held that they used to cause content that caused them to cause people to overthrow the government. If those people still push for that ideology, which creates discontent, they will be eliminated because that discontent could hurt the new government. So again, anyone who is any type of socialist, whether it be some version of fascism or some version of communist, if the revolution ever takes place, they will turn against each other, and whoever has the majority or the best tactics or the best will or the best or the most capable of inflicting extreme violence on other people will come up on top and destroy all their rivals. It's just the way that socialism works. Because Marx believed in violent revolution. And if you don't have violent revolution, you're never going to have communism of any sort. But anyways, I'll leave it there. Just, again, there's going to be a lot of people who are like, oh, you think fascism is a left-wing ideology. And I'll just be like, you weren't paying attention, my man. You fell for the propaganda. I'm sorry. Right-wing ideologies tend to be either extremely religious or wanting as much freedom for the individual as possible, which would mean, technically, that anarchy and libertarianism are right-wing ideologies, which is why you'll see somebody who is even slightly left-wing be called a gay communist by a libertarian. Like, oh, you want open borders, but you want more taxes? You're a communist. Which, again, communism does not necessarily mean that you're isolationist, but still, there are very few communist countries out there in the world that have ever existed in the world that believed in the free travel between different states. But anyways, I'll leave it there. Bye, guys.